Hey there guys, alright, today we are back with some more extra credits, continuing on with the extra history series of the history of paper money, working out the kinks, number 5. Before we dive in though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I'd love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Okay, history of paper money. Let's just go ahead and dive right in. Not going to say anything before the beginning of the video because these videos, like, the last video was a bit of a low point, I remember, I think it was the last video, was a struggle to kind of comprehend. That one I felt like was a bit poorly explained, if I'm remembering right. It was either that one or the one before it, I can't remember. Hopefully this one is a bit better.
Over the last few episodes, we've seen the intellectual underpinnings of paper money slowly come into place. But having nebulous ideas about why paper money might be good is one thing. Getting people to really believe and trust in it is another matter entirely. And so today, we're gonna tackle the development of the one thing that brought the whole system together. The thing we now use to prevent the very problem John Law ran himself into. Very rarely does humanity find ideas that are simply good. Most of the time, when a revolutionary new idea is introduced, we've got to stumble around in the dark for a bit, figuring out all the terrible ramifications and pitfalls that come with it before we can use it well. Paper money was no different, because when you start printing money, it comes with a lot of questions. Now, you might think that the first question would be, how much money should we print? But actually, before you can even figure out things like how to regulate how much money's being printed, you first have to ask, who's gonna print the money? Now today, this might seem like a bizarre question, as we're all used to there being some central authority in each country or currency block issuing one currency that everybody accepts at face value. But you have to remember that paper money didn't enter the world as part of some top-down system. Instead, it basically started with a bunch of bankers realizing that they could give people receipts for gold and silver instead of actually giving customers their gold and silver back. Which means that one by one, every bank basically started printing their own banknotes. And that is a mess to deal with. I mean, if you've ever had to go overseas and deal with exchanging money, you've gotten just a tiny fraction of an idea of what a hassle this would have been. But it gets worse. Imagine having a few hundred different banks issuing notes in your own country. Now imagine a world where our modern international currency exchange that makes it easy for banks to trade money doesn't exist. And then imagine having to deal with all of this just to shop in the next town over.
Yeah.
This is basically the scenario you end up with. You deposit $10 worth of gold in your local village bank. They hand you back $10 worth of their shiny, bank-specific banknotes. Now you go off to the big city to spend your money, but when you bring out your money to spend it on something there, the big city merchant might simply not take it. Or, more likely, they'll pull out some big chart and say to you, well, let's see. Your bank is pretty far away, so if we, or more likely our bank, ever wanted to redeem these banknotes of yours, we'd have to travel all the way to your tiny podunk village. So, since that's going to be such an expensive hassle for us to do, we're only going to take your banknotes at 75% value. Now, of course, you would probably grumble a bit over this, but then the merchant would say, wait, hang on, I'm not done. It says here that your bank only has one branch? That's an issue. It means we're gonna have to redeem these notes as soon as possible because your tiny bank might go belly up at any time, which would render these banknotes you just gave me worthless. That additional risk and the inconvenience forces me to accept these bills at another 25% off face value. And so, your $10 that you deposited in your bank would only...
Now, of course, they're spending more time explaining this, which is what I think maybe they should have done in the previous episode. Maybe, like, take more time on it or something. But they're taking their time for this explanation. And that's why I feel like this is already working so much better than, than all of the last episode. So I'm appreciating, like, this. I'm following this one just fine, yes.
Have $5 worth of purchasing power in a neighboring city, leaving you probably a bit less than jazzed about this whole paper money thing.
Yeah.
So clearly every country needed a unified currency that everyone could believe in. But this also had to evolve sort of organically, and it ended up happening in a similar way in most countries, because almost all of the problems we're gonna see with the move to paper money are solved in nearly every country with one great innovation: the central bank. But central banks didn't always solve all of the functions they do today, and in fact, most weren't established to
What are
solve any of them at
problems?
all. Truth is, calling a central bank a singular big innovation would be a lie. They were really more like a patch server and a hotfix machine for paper money. So let's talk about the story of the Bank of England, because it was really the first institution that we would call a central bank, and many early central banks share a similar
Gather
tale.
round, children.
The year is 1694. The government...
Ah, yes, 1694. I remember that year quite well. Ah, the memories. It was a Tuesday afternoon.
desperately needs a way to service its debts. The 17th and the 18th centuries would be times of unbelievably costly wars. For the first time, troops had to be deployed.
Man, I wonder what happens in the 18th century for Britain. I wonder what couple wars, or like 5, happen. Man, it's a miracle Britain survived as a fucking empire beyond 18... Oh, when did Napoleon fall? Because that's a lot of costly fucking wars. The fact that their empire stayed, hell, the fact that they even grew their empire beyond that point is a fucking miracle. Like, I'm just now putting it together. The miracle that it is, because when we look at other times in history, like, Britain isn't able to do this again. Britain goes through World War I, and then World War II breaks the empire. They're not able to hold on to it. The empire goes away after, like, 20-ish, 30-ish years after the end of World War II, because they just can't afford it really anymore. Plus also, you know, American influence on being anti-imperialist, switching over to neo-imperialism, which is through economic control instead of direct control. Whereas, because, you know, the Soviet Union's like, oh, these Westerners, they are imperialists, they control you. And so it's like, you know, you kind of got to dissolve the... And anyways, but also the money cost from the 2 world wars also kind of broke Britain there. But to survive, like, there was one big war, I think, before the 7 Years' War that I can't remember the name of, that I think Britain was involved in. And then there was the 7 Years' War, which you know, you could argue, I think, rather plausibly, the 7 Years' War was the first world war, because there was fighting, I believe, in all over the world. There was fighting in India. There was fighting, I think, in Africa a little bit, maybe between the British and French. There was fighting in Europe. There was fighting in the Americas. You know, so pretty much a world war.
And supplied.
Anyways, what was I saying? Back on topic. Yeah. And then after the 7 Years' War, just a few years later, you have the beginning of the American Revolution, which of course may not have been as taxing on the British as the 7 Years' War was until really the French joined in. And then when the French joined in, when did the French join in? How far into the war? It took a little bit. I'm trying to think if the war ended like within a couple years after the French joined. I can't remember though. That one wasn't so much economic but a political defeat, but that still cost them money, because there were still several thousand British troops in the Americas. And then after that, you've got Napoleon. You got all that French business for the next like 20 years. That definitely cost a fuck ton of money, more so than probably the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution combined. So, like, it's a fucking miracle, man.
Across the globe, navies had to be maintained in every ocean. Powder and shells were expended on an unprecedented scale. This drove most major nations of Europe to the brink of financial collapse. To some, the answer was...
So what do? A, nothing. Ask Jesus for more bread and fish. Establish a central bank. All 3.
It's clear. Establish a bank to service the national debt. So, after much debate, the Bank of England came to be. This is a powerful thing, because having the government do all of its banking with your bank makes your bank pretty secure, and means that that bank's gonna need to have branches, or at least banks that they work closely with all over the place. And because of this security, people started to value Bank of England banknotes over most of the other ones out there. At times, people would even pay a premium for them, offering 1.1 or 1.2 pounds per 1 pound note, simply because they were reliable and universally accepted. But the Bank of England note really wouldn't become the official banknote of the country until 1844, the middle of the 19th century. With the Bank Charter Act of 1844, no new bank would be granted the right to print banknotes, and every time a bank was bought, it would have to remove its notes from circulation, meaning that eventually the Bank of England banknote would be the only paper money in the land. But even with this system, it wasn't until 1921, less than 100 years ago, that the last non-Bank of England
That's not less than 100 years ago when I'm watching. Time. I'm old. Hey, God.
bank in the country stopped printing their own banknotes. And in Scotland and Ireland, there are still to this day a few banks that retain their ancient right to print pound sterling notes. So this system of
What?
having one unified currency that we think of as being money, we take it for granted now, but it really isn't that old. In fact, in the United States, non-Federal Reserve banknotes were being issued as late as 1935. But even with this issue resolved, the lack of a centralized currency wasn't the only problem we were going to have to figure out with these new banknotes. There was also the problem of bank runs. With the invention of the banknote, modern fractional reserve banking really came into its own. Fractional reserve banking is where the bank lends out more than it can actually pay for with the money it has on hand, based on the idea that not everybody's going to try to collect.
Exactly, and that's how I think modern banking still works. As I said in the video where they first mentioned fractional reserve banking, which broke, what was it, the French bank that Englishman who fled to the Netherlands made, right? He was the one that ended up becoming in charge of like a Bank of France or whatever, or at least a state-sponsored bank in France. And then that shit went belly up because everyone, I think, tried to cash in their money, their banknotes at the same time.
Collect at once. So, for example, let's say that you deposit $100 in gold at your bank, and the bank is required to keep a 10% fractional reserve. That means that when you deposited that $100 in gold, you enabled your bank to lend out an additional $1,000 in banknotes. This system is a great thing because it means that the money supply can expand far past the amount of gold or silver in an economy and can meet the needs of a growing economic base, which is the very problem we were trying to solve with this whole paper money thing in the first place. But it does have one problem. What happens if everybody does try to get their money out of the bank at the same time? Well, if people believe that a bank won't be able to repay them, whether it's because they've issued too many banknotes or simply because they've made too many bad loans, those people start flocking to the bank to get their money out of there. This, of course, leaves the bank unable to pay anybody because they only keep a fraction of what they need to pay everyone on hand at any given time. So the bank collapses, and everybody loses. Anyone with money left in the bank is simply wiped out. And if this starts happening on a broad scale, it creates another problem. People stop depositing money in banks at all, and instead start hoarding it because they're afraid that the banks are going to go bust. Meanwhile, the
Oh, I think I know what the solution is going to be. The solution is going to be that the banks start providing you interest on the money that you leave within them, because then you are more... it is better for you to not freak out and withdraw your money, because then if you withdraw your money and stash it away yourself, you're not going to be gaining more interest on the income you have left with the bank. However, right, but you leave it in, you're going to be making money. You're going to be going up. So, obviously, it is in your best interest to keep the money in the bank because of the interest. Gotta take a shot every time I've said interest.
Banks are trying to hoard up as much real money, gold, silver, and central bank notes as they can, so that they can somehow pay all of the people rushing the bank to withdraw their accounts without going bust. This ultimately means that a lot of money is just sucked out of the economy. It just stops circulating, and we're back to our original problem of literally having too little money to make the economy run. This happened in England throughout the 19th century. But here again, the central bank patch was applied. By having a central bank serve as a lender of last resort, meaning a bank that could lend real capital to other banks, banks that were in good shape but didn't have the funds on hand to withstand a panic where everybody tried to withdraw their money at once, could survive, and the money supply for the nation wouldn't dry up. Over the last 100 years, we have found dozens of other...
Okay, I guess I was wrong on my prediction there. I guess interest doesn't come until probably the 20th century. But still, yeah, I guess people in localized areas could freak out and it won't be a panic throughout the entire country. But if it's a panic throughout the entire country, then that's still not going to be the solution, because the central bank is still going to run out of money to give out to the subsection.
Ways that the central bank can be used to hotfix problems resulting from our ability to print money. And we're certainly not done yet. There is incredible power in having one bank that basically can't fail unless the government does, whose function is much more about keeping an economy strong and stable than about making a profit. Because so long as the government is doing well, so is that central bank. And this has helped fuel the growth of a world no longer bound by the amount of gold and silver that's being passed around. But there's one more step to go before we get to the world we live in today, where currency is divorced from any real value except the value we give it, where money works because we believe it works. And that step is abandoning the gold standard. So join us next time as we wrap up the history of paper money.
Haven't we still not abandoned the gold standard? I know the USA has. I think the USA abandoned it, in the 1800s? Andrew Jackson, I believe, and then that caused a depression. I don't think the world as a whole has left the gold standard. Like, governments still have reserves of actual gold and silver, I believe. Because because it's shiny, it still has value, whereas paper doesn't have as much value. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe he'll probably explain it more in the next video when it's that episode. But anyways, that was the history of paper money, working out the Kinks Extra History number 5 by Extra Credits. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.